Thanks, Julia. Okay, I must click, got it. Yeah, okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our talk on professionalism, academic integrity, and voice in EAP for STEM. My name is Anna, and this is my colleague, Jane.
Hello.
Jane and I are in sessional EAP tutors, and we support students and staff in the School of Chemical and Process Engineering and Mechanical Engineering at the University of Leeds. And we think that being embedded and working so closely with departments whose disciplinary practices are often different to ours can be challenging, but it's definitely a good opportunity to reflect on our teaching and expand our EAP knowledge base. So today we are proposing 3 such explorations. I will reflect on conceptualization of academic integrity in the departments, and Jane will discuss models of engineering and of engineering thinking to explore professionalism as a useful lens through which to look at academic integrity in engineering. We would also like to hear from you in the Q&A section and on the Padlet as well. Our first exploration takes a form of 4 nano case studies. And I want to share examples of conversations that challenge my general EAP or generic EAP understanding of academic integrity and motivated me to explore this topic further. So my first academic integrity tutorial was with a medical engineering student working on definitions and description of a specific tissue, shoulder ligaments it was, for his summative research portfolio. And as you can see on the slide, the feedback the student got, the marker was worried about high Turnitin score of 35%. But in the tutorial, the student rightly pointed out that actually all the similarity came from use of technical words. And I'm sure you would probably have useful advice for the student, useful advice to offer, but I will admit it was my second month supporting STEM students, and I drew a blank. The only advice I could think of at that moment was changing the sentence structure, which is relatively limited advice when it comes to EAP practice. And so, yeah, just sharing this embarrassing experience with you. My second challenge came in conversation with a lecturer whose module had unusually high percentage of academic integrity violations. And my initial analysis suggested that it's actually the types of questions in the open book exam that might have been contributing to this issue. So you will appreciate from the slide that questions like define, describe, consider features of, invite use of theory. I produced a resource about acknowledging sources and paraphrasing, and I was rather surprised when the lecturer revealed that he was less interested in the former than the latter. So student citing the sources was almost dismissed in favor of using own words to demonstrate understanding, because this is what he felt was more important for engineering students. And I was really surprised, and it's because it is at odds with disciplinary practices in our discipline, where lack of citations is a clear case of plagiarism, whereas poor paraphrasing is merely a case of malpractice. So a different set of values maybe, or expectations there. And discussing malpractice with a pre-sessional student on language for engineering is a third challenge I want to talk to you about. So while the student clearly understands the currency and the value of using sources, he was really not clear about the value or purpose of paraphrasing. Actually, interestingly, linking to the case I just talked about, we had a very long and frustrating conversation, and he was just not buying into my explanation. So again, to me, it attests to some kind of maybe disciplinary differences in understanding what constitutes valuable text or valuable use of sources. And finally, my fourth challenge came in a conversation with mechatronics and robotics student. who was very proudly telling me about this long and complicated code he wrote. So student was so proud of his code that he actually made it open source and uploaded to a website for others to download and use. And while I know this is exactly what a dedicated programmer would do, as I have programmers in family with my EAP hat on, I was quite, actually, I was not quite sure whether this already constituted collusion or not, whether this was acceptable practice, and whether it was my place to comment on it, because this was done as part of the professional project. So I know the supervisor was involved as well. So another challenging situation. So now what have I learned from these conversations and challenges? I want to say first here that I often hear colleagues and students in the mechanical engineering department refer to themselves as people who solve problems. This is what they say. They say, we are engineers, we solve problems. So they are extremely practice oriented. And it is perhaps not surprising then that students seem to perceive academic integrity guidelines as arbitrary and purely linked to academic life and intellectual endeavors. So consequently, not very practical. And I just started wondering whether it might be more meaningful for us to find a way to relate this important concept to professional values. So those professional values might better resonate with the students. So, and indeed, Gilmore and colleagues, if you could, yeah. So Gilmore and colleagues propose viewing STEM students as budding professionals, and using some of those disciplinary values or sense of belonging to the discipline or engineering community to educate students on academic integrity. And another example here is the notion of responsibility towards colleagues or the public that is very often mentioned in different engineering codes of conduct, but we are not really exploiting it in institutional conceptualization or academic conceptualization of academic integrity. And then speaking more broadly, there is this school of thought that proposes that academic integrity needs to be discipline specific and taught as part of discipline and culturation process. Because as we can all imagine, or maybe we already know this, malpractice looks different in music and in philosophy. Okay, so moving on to the second point here, the second thing that I've noticed is that students maybe are not as well prepared to deal with actual academic integrity dilemmas that as we would hope they are. My example on the previous slide was about sharing code, but the literature here points to collaborative tasks with individual submissions of, for example, lab reports where students work together in the lab, but then the submissions individual. So these are relatively popular activities, teaching activities modes or teaching activities in STEM. And maybe we need to be finding a way to help students navigate this difference between collaboration and collusion. And in terms of lessons and implications for the tutors and lecturers, I strongly feel that EAP practitioners transitioning to support STEM students or staff need peer or institutional support. I felt very lost at the beginning, and it was not part of my repertoire at all. No epistemologies or just practices, common practices to fall back on. We also might need to be a bit more critical about the materials we use on our pre-sessional courses and use those developing disciplinary literacies to evaluate and change those materials. So for example, this is literally something very timely. I found this in my own, on my own slides this week. And I'm sure you will recognize it's a very typical phrase we say in your academic work. You must refer to work of others to support your arguments. But I think maybe if I was to teach this lesson again, I would say in your academic and professional work, yeah, you must refer work of others to support your arguments or solutions to problems. So trying and maybe adapt this discourse a little bit and make it a little bit more linked to professionalism. Two more lessons are issues of assessment literacy and academic integrity literacy. So for the first one, as EAP practitioners, we are aware that some tasks might lend themselves to malpractice. And we could use this expertise with colleagues in the department. So for example, if colleagues ask for definitions or use of analytical frameworks in open book exams online, this might basically turn into troubles. And this is where where our expertise is valuable and helpful. In terms of academic literacy, there needs to be more understanding and consistency regarding what constitutes malpractice and what the desired practices are. So for example, whether citations are required in open book exams or not, there needs to be consistency in decision, and then this needs to be communicated to the students because in this case, it was not. So I feel fostering this relationship where we support the staff with their assessment and academic integrity literacy, but also learn about their disciplinary practices to inform our materials and course design is mutually beneficial. So that's it for me regarding conceptualization of academic integrity in STEM. And let's hear from Jane now, who will explore our second theme. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Struggling to move the slide on. Okay, so yeah, I think from my perspective, Anna has identified the key challenges for people in our position trying to help students in unfamiliar disciplines develop academic integrity literacies, that there are significant differences in understanding between kind of us and them and students and us and students and them, but also inconsistencies across tasks and tutors. And I don't think it should be underestimated how much more difficult this makes our job. But I think Anna has also touched upon a potential solution, and it's that solution that I would like to explore briefly now, which is the making of explicit links between core academic literacies and professional contexts, values, attributes, and standards, etc., encouraging students to see themselves as budding professionals or as practicing professionals. We tend to deal on the in-sessional programs, we deal with master students. So a lot of them have actually, you know, they've come from work, they're already professionals, they're now developing their expertise and specializing. And I think this is a potential solution for two main reasons, really. Firstly, that there are already quite strong links between assessment tasks and professional values, etc. In chemical engineering, at least, the curriculum is informed by professional bodies and is accredited by professional bodies. In fact, I've met some of them this morning. The Institute of Chemical Engineers have been in putting the final touches to their accreditation of 2 master's programs and 1 undergraduate program. Therefore, in theory, at least, the assessment tasks should resemble, to some extent, professional outputs and processes. And where that's the case, as in some of the assessments that I've had insight into, where core literacies are framed in professional terms, that can really help students understand what is expected of them. So I co-teach some sessions with the module leader of the research project module for the master's students in chemical and process engineering. And they, in the background of their research report, have to explain the significance and the novelty and the benefit to society of their individual project in terms accessible to a lay audience, which they often don't really understand why they should have to do that, because they're technical professionals, they're specialists. Why do they have to explain it to people that don't know what it is? But when it's explained to them that as engineers in the world of work, they're very unlikely to be working in isolation, they're almost definitely going to be working in a team, and probably most of the people in that team won't be experts. They're going to have to be communicating about their work to management or to clients, or they'll be putting in funding bids or proposals for specific contracts and stuff. And so most of the people they interact with about their work probably will not be experts. Once they understand that, they're much more prepared, if not actively keen, to learn then how to do that, which is where we as EAP practitioners can come in and provide some useful work. And the other reason is then I hope I don't need to, well, I'm not going to go into any detail about the links between having a clear voice and a clear understanding of the task and answering the question appropriately and avoiding many major academic integrity issues. But if we take those things as read, then what I'm wondering is if we can help students understand their assessment tasks by framing them in terms of professional contexts, and we can help students avoid academic integrity issues by helping them understand the task, then could professionalism be a useful lens for exploring academic integrity and actually possibly just more generalized EAP in STEM? So two models, I'm going to show you two models that I discovered during the summer preparing for a pre-sessional module, both related to thinking, critical thinking in engineering. So this model displays at the center is the core work of engineering, making things that work and making things work better. The outer circle, the engineering habits of mind, those are the 6 ways in which engineers think and act in order to achieve their core work. And then those are essential attributes. But then those are also the outer circle, the learning habits in mind, are not specific to engineers, but considered essential attributes for anybody wanting to succeed in the modern world of work. And what I find interesting as an EAP teacher is the link between that model, which is for engineers, and then just the general graduate attributes that are listed on the University of Leeds website. Now, that list seems more familiar to me than the items in the model, but I can see some quite clear overlaps. And I kind of feel where there's overlaps, where I recognize something in an engineering framework from my EAP framework, I feel like that's a useful way in. So this could be used, for example, to generate some conversations about what academic integrity is. You know, you could just look at one list or the other list and work through. So commercial awareness, for example, maybe stuff relating to patents or proprietary software or machinery or things like that, or critical thinking, which is for me probably where academic integrity mostly fits in the taxonomy of academic literacies. But we could just use those attributes to start a conversation. And there's another model, which I think has also got some potential. So again, this is critical thinking specifically for engineers, but this particular model is not just for engineers, it's kind of applicable to everyone. The text I'm citing there, which Anna, if you could give it a couple of minutes, but pop it in the chat shortly. You don't need to do it right now, it's fine, but yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting because he takes this framework and shows how it could be done in engineering with specific examples relating to the design process. But what this model basically, this suggests that those essential intellectual standards must be applied to the fundamental elements of thought that happen whenever we think about anything in order to develop the desired attributes of the mature engineering thinker, which are the intellectual traits and virtues at the bottom. And I think this is particularly interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, the link between the intellectual standards and the features of academic writing that we learn about when we first start learning about EAP. There's quite a lot of overlap there, which I found particularly interesting. The Elements of Thought, the book that source Paul et al. 2006, that this model is adapted from, they list some questions that are kind of implied by understanding the fundamental elements of thought. And it strikes me quite strongly that those are all really useful questions in helping students understand a task. And again, as an EAP teacher, I've encouraged lots of students to ask those questions. So just the fact that those questions are appearing in a book about developing critical thinking in engineers is quite reassuring for me. So hopefully a little bit reassuring for you as well. And then, yeah, but if we just look at the intellectual traits and virtues, that for me then might be somewhere where we could start to have conversations about academic integrity. So just looking at those traits and virtues, which do you think might have links with what we understand by academic integrity? I can't see the chat, so I don't know if anyone's writing in it. Anna, do you want to guess something? Or does anyone else want to guess anything? Okay, right. Well, when I asked Anna yesterday, she said intellectual integrity, which is what I first thought. But interestingly, intellectual integrity in this model does actually mean something different and doesn't really have an overlap with academic integrity. the one which is perhaps more linked to what we think about is intellectual empathy. And it's interesting to see representing others' views presented in that context. And another interesting one is confidence and reason, elements relating to evidence, position, support for position, etc., comes in there. So for me, this might be an interesting way to start to have conversations with students and with tutors, because it is complicated. The inconsistencies, just the diversity of the field we're in, from the field where we've come from, it is a complicated issue. Conversations do need to happen, but I think I've said two-way there, but I actually meant to change that to three-way, because I think EAP teachers and students have an awful lot to contribute to any collective understanding that's developed of academic integrity. The conversations might not be easy. I think we've both said elsewhere that we do sometimes find it difficult to have conversations in these schools. It could require culture change within the departments. Certainly, there is sometimes the idea that sort of students are in deficit in some way, and that they do malpractice because they're bad. And also, I think some tutors think of academic integrity as just a thing that you either do or don't do. It's not something that should be learned or can be learned, and therefore should be trained. So there are probably changes that need to happen on a deeper level. But yeah, we're just wondering after this whether professionalism and professional values and attributes might be a useful basis for approaching those conversations. So that's the end of the second exploration. Now, the third and hopefully the most interesting is over to you. So we'd just like you to think about these questions. We haven't got breakout rooms, just to please speak up here if you would like to talk, but we've also made a Padlet. So Anna, do you want to stick the Padlet link in the chat as well, if you haven't already? Yeah, so if you've got anything you'd like to add there, that would be great. Now, we will be keeping this open for the next week or so, just in case anybody wants to add anything later, because we're just fascinated in what other people think, really. We're only just started sort of coming out and talking about our experiences in engineering, aren't we? So yeah, I'd be really happy to hear what others think. So yeah, thank you. If anyone has